Well, ladies and gents, thanks very much for allowing me to come along to bore you to death for 30 minutes on a far-flung battle that took place in 1884. I'll say at the start of this talk, I'm not an expert. I've never been to university. I left Richmond Road School down the road here at age 15 with no qualifications. I'm just an ordinary bloke with an interest in military history. And I'm going to talk about the Broken Sword VC. This has gone down in the annals of Royal Naval history, and I'm going to tell you the story about it and how this actually came about. Now, for those of you still awake at the end of this presentation, if you do have any questions, all you need to do is to print it on the back of one of these things, throw it in my general direction, and it's not refundable. So where does this story start? Well, it starts in the Suez Canal. Now, the Suez Canal connects the Mediterranean Sea into the Red Sea and then down to the Gulf of Aden and beyond. So obviously, strategically very important for Britain. In 1882, there was a mutiny in the Egyptian army. And they tried to overthrow the Khedive, the ruler of Egypt. And obviously, this posed a great threat to the Suez Canal. So a very reluctant Gladstone and the Liberal Democrats, the Liberal government deployed troops. So both British and Indian troops were deployed there. In the Battle of Tel el-Kebir, in 1882, they defeated the Egyptian army. Britain took over control of the Suez Canal, and we then sent British officers and also British senior non-commissioned officers to retrain the Egyptian army. The problem that Britain had was to the south of Egypt was the vast Sudan, and this was the only thing it exported was slaves, usually to the Arabian states. Egypt had outposts in the Sudan. They were manned by poorly trained, poorly equipped, poorly motivated Egyptian conscript soldiers. Then into the equation comes this man here. He's got a yard and a half of Arabic name, which I won't begin to try to pronounce, but he was the son of a boat builder, but he then proclaimed himself to be the Mahdi, the chosen one. He was chosen by the Prophet Muhammad, blessings be upon him, to free the people of Sudan from Egypt's rule. And the tribes in the Sudan flocked to his colours to rid their country of what they called the hated Turk, which was the Egyptians. Just to give you some idea, Egypt had these garrisons there in the Sudan, and it was decided that they would have to be evacuated. And again, Gladstone did not want to commit British troops to the Sudan, so he sent this man here, Charles Gordon, Royal Engineer, one of only 3 statues in the Medway towns, him and his camel in Brompton Barracks next door. He went to Khartoum, and his remit was to evacuate the garrison and the Europeans from the Sudan. Then this chap comes into the equation. His name is Osman Dinga. And to the tribes to the north of the Sudan that bordered with Egypt were the Beja warriors, and they were subdivided into other tribes. This man was a one-time notorious slave owner, but he was the chief of what was called the Hazandona tribe. Now, don't be put off by the Larry Grayson limp wrist, because he was a notorious warrior and a thorn in the side of the British for some time. These are the Hazandona warriors, and they they frizzled their hair with butter, and therefore the Tommies nicknamed them the Fuzzy Wuzzies. They were immortalised by two Englishmen, one by the name of Rudyard Kipling in his poem the Fuzzy Wuzzy, and secondly by the actor Clive Dunn, who as Corporal Jones in Dad's Army had fought these fellows at the Battle of Omdurman in 1898, and as we've all heard, they don't like it up 'em, sir, they don't like it up 'em. Notorious, fierce warriors. Now, just to give you some idea of the location, what we're talking about is, it should be there, a place called El Teb, a small place. It consisted of a graveyard, a disused sugar factory, and a small village. But Osman Dinger's men were there. Now, the aim was that below them was the garrison at Toka, and it was wanted that garrison needed to be evacuated. So on the 4th of February 1884, an Egyptian force under a disgraced British officer by the name of Valentine Baker tried to engage the Mahdi forces there, and they were absolutely annihilated. Of the 3,000 Egyptian troops, 2,000 became casualties. So therefore, Gladstone had to commit British troops. They were under the command of General Sir Gerald Graham, VC. He was awarded his Victoria Cross in the Crimean War. He's Royal Engineer, and he actually knew Gordon. Gordon was a friend of his. He had a force of 1 weak cavalry brigade, 2 infantry brigades, Royal Engineers and Royal Artillery, plus all the cooks, grooms and bottle washers that would have come along with him as well, including the war correspondent. The thing about in Victorian times, the war correspondents actually fought. Very often they had to because of where they were in the situation. So, Graham's forces then, they set sail from Egypt down to Suakin. Now, Suakin was the toehold that the British had on the Red Sea, and they were determined not to lose this. The rest, they weren't too bothered about the rest of the Sudan, but they were determined not to lose this. And then they sailed 50 miles down to Trikatat, which was a bay there, and the idea was that they would engage the enemy at El Teb and relieve the garrison at Tokar. And just fast forward a little bit, by the time they fought, after they'd fought the battle, Tokar had actually fallen anyway. So there, off he goes then. They didn't have many maps or whatever, so they relied on guides, and the force stepped off from Trinkitat towards El Teb. Just run through the runners and riders who were involved there. They're the 1st Infantry Brigade, 3 RRC is Chinese for the King's Royal Rifle Corps. They'd come from Egypt. The 2nd Battalion Royal Irish Fusiliers, they were under strength. They were on their way back from Egypt when they were redirected to the Sudan. I'll tell you why they were under strength in just a moment. And you have to forgive me, I don't see too well. Then there was the 1st Scottish Division Royal Artillery, and then the 26th Company of the Royal Engineers. The second, sorry, just going back one. They were commanded by Sir Revers Buller, who had been awarded the Victoria Cross in the Zulu War of 1879. 2nd Brigade, they were from Major General Davis. The RMLI and RMA, that's Chinese for the Royal Marine Light Infantry and the Royal Marine Artillery, because at this time the Royal Marines were divided into those two elements. The RMLI wore red uniforms, so they were known as the Red Marines, and the RMA wore blue uniforms, and they were known as the Blue Marines. First Black Watch, they'd been in Egypt, so they were up to strength. The first YNLs, the first York and Lancaster Regiment, they'd been posted to Aden. They were on their way back from Aden to home, and they got no further than here, and they were involved in this as well. And again, you've got the Royal Artillery and the Royal Engineers. Right, the Cavalry Brigade, it was a weak cavalry brigade. It was commanded by General Stewart, a very popular and efficient cavalry officer. Unfortunately, he died of wounds at the bloody Battle of Abu Klea the following year. The 10th Hussars, they were on their way, again, they were on their way back from India. They got as far as Aden with their families, and the families came home, and the Hussars were sent to the Sudan. They were under strength, same as the Royal Irish Fusiliers, because in Victorian times, despite the heat and the flies and the disease and everything, India was a popular posting for the British soldiers. Why? Because of the strict caste system and the huge labour market that there was in Egypt at the time, that ordinary soldiers, not officers, ordinary soldiers could have servants that would clean, they couldn't clean their weapons obviously, but they could clean their kit, they'd shave them in the morning, do all their laundry and so forth. So they were under strength. 19th Hussars, they were up to strength. They'd come from Egypt, and there was mounted infantry, and it literally is what it says on the tin. These were infantry soldiers mounted on horses for greater mobility. The majority of this mounted infantry came from the Royal Sussex Regiment. Then on to the Naval Brigade. There was a Naval Brigade from officers and ratings from these ships. I did a bit of research on this to try and make it local, but the only one that was local is HMS, can't see it, HMS Britain and HMS, I can never pronounce it, Ulysses. They were both Chatham-based ships, so there's no doubt that local men, like the Royal Marines and the Royal Marine Light Infantry, would have been local men that would have taken part in this. Now, their job was to man the machine guns. This is the Gardner machine gun, named after Mr. Gardner, the American inventor, and also the more better known Gatling gun, again named after Mr. Gatling, the American inventor. And the sailors had to drag these guns along. 10 men at a time would drag the guns along. The artillery pieces were actually carried on camels. So on the 29th of February 1884, Graham gets his troops to advance to contact on Osman Digger at the village of El Teb. He put his troops into a square, and they advanced towards those black things that you can see there are actually rifle pits, because this wasn't just spear and sword versus rifle. The Osman Digger's forces had actually captured rifles, machine guns and field guns from the Egyptians that they defeated previously. So as they were marching towards the enemy lines, they then passed the putrefying, rotten corpses of 2,000 odd Egyptian soldiers that had been laying there since the 4th of February. This is a portrait showing the dervish side facing towards the British square. They had got captured Egyptian gunners chained to the field guns under the penalty of death if they didn't fire them at the British. So they wheeled the guns out, they opened fire on the square, and Graham ordered the infantry to lie down. So the infantry lay down, and the sailors and the gunners then ran the machine guns and the field guns out and engaged and silenced the enemy field guns and machine guns. At that, the dervishes then set a headlong assault upon the British square. So the Tommies would have stood up, and they charged forward, absolutely fearless. They feared nothing. If they were killed, they were going to go to paradise. They were absolutely fearless. It was been said that they'd been told by their leaders that these Turks, the British, would do the same as the Egyptian done, fire one ragged volley, throw their rifles down, run away, get down on their knees and begging for their lives. Well, this didn't happen. The Jocks of the Black Watch and the Gordons, the Irishmen from the Royal Irish Fusiliers, the Englishmen from the York and Lancs, and so on, stood there and fired disciplined fire, and they shot them down in heaps. They were armed with the Martini Henry .45. The round was about that big. It inflicted horrific injuries on anybody it hit. It'd blow a bloke's head off. It'd enter one bloke and kill the bloke behind them. But still they came on. Not many made it, but some actually got through to the square where they were engaged with a bayonet. There was a scandal after this because a lot of the bayonets were made of cheap steel, and they buckled and they bent, and there were literally questions asked in the House afterwards about that. But after throwing themselves at the square and so forth, the dervishes were getting nowhere. The cavalry were ordered to wait until the infantry had broken the assault upon them, and then to chase them down and disperse the tribesmen. Unfortunately, Stuart made a mistake there. He saw some warriors thinking that they were retreating. They weren't, and he unleashed the 10th and 19th Hussars. They ended up making 3 cavalry charges to try and disperse the enemy. Now, the dervishes knew how to deal with cavalry. They didn't stand up and try and fight somebody. They lay down. When the rider went past, and they jumped up like gazelles, ran behind the horse, because the cavalryman is vulnerable from behind. They'd slash the horse's legs, hamstring the horses. Down came the driver. Down came the rider, and that was that. The majority of the casualties, almost half the casualties of that day, were suffered by the 23rd and 19th Hussars. Here is Lieutenant Colonel Barrow of the 19th Hussars. He was surrounded by the dervishes. His horse was killed, and he was very, very nearly lost his life. But for the fact, very dramatic Victorian picture here of Quartermaster Sergeant Marshall, who, seeing this, came galloping up, grabbed his colonel and dragged him to safety, and he certainly saved his life. He handed the colonel over to a couple of troopers to take him to safety, and he, Marshall, rode back into the fray himself. As a result of that, he was awarded the Victoria Cross later on in the year by Queen Victoria at Windsor Castle. With regard to the actual cross itself, there was a bit of a mix-up, that the medal was sent to India whilst he was coming back to UK. So the medal that Queen Victoria actually presented him wasn't the original one. Career soldier, he was a good soldier. He came up through the ranks. He was a major. He retired from the army in 1908. When war broke out, he rejoined for the First World War and ended up a lieutenant colonel. And he was a big noise in the Freemason Society. One of the lodges that he belonged to was the Cairo Lodge. He's buried in Scotland. Now, this is where the story of the broken VC comes about. When the guns were ran out, one of the machine by the naval parties, one of the machine guns was overrun, and the lieutenant was mortally wounded. So spring forward is Captain Arthur Wilson. Now, he should not have been there. he just went along for the ride. He was on the staff of Admiral Hewitt, VC, and they were within the square. But when he saw this, Wilson ran out and started to fight off the dervishes with his sword, and his sword was broken. He was severely wounded, and his life was saved when some soldiers of the YNLs, the York and Lancs, came up to extradite him from this. And he was awarded the Victoria Cross. He a career sailor. He ended up first Sea Lord. He specialises later on in torpedoes. From what research I did on, he wasn't a popular man. He was abrasive, and to quote the Daily Telegraph on the obits, he never married. He's buried in Suffolk, I believe. Now you'll notice there that, or you may or may not notice that the ribbon there is a different colour from the soldiers' ribbon. In 1856, when the VC came about, it had two colours. It was crimson for the Army and navy blue for the Royal Navy. And then on the 1st of April 1918, April Fool's Day, along came the Royal Air Force, and so it just become the one ribbon. So after several hours of fighting, the dervishes then dispersed, and Graham took El Teb. That's the casualty there. 30 killed, 23 of whom were in the cavalry, 142 wounded, and in there in red is Valentine Baker, and he was the commander of the British commander of the Egyptians who'd fought there on the 4th of February. He volunteered to be an intelligence officer, and he was severely wounded in the jaw by a shell fragment. And when he was treated by a naval surgeon, he took a piece of metal out of his jaw about yay big. Very, very brave man. As far as the dervish casualties were concerned, it was estimated that there was between 15 and 2,000 casualties. About 125 bodies were actually counted at the battlefield. This is with the medal anorak on now. This is the medal that was struck, the Egypt medal 1882 to 89. You'll see there's got various clasps on it. You'll see there that the ribbon has two colours. It's the blue and the white, and this represents the Blue Nile and the White Nile. The medal on the right is the Khedive Star, which was given to British troops by the Khedive, the ruler of Egypt. So it was bronze. It was made in Birmingham. So just in conclusion, then, and if you forgive what I'm going to say, even if you took all the blood and snot out of this, the sheer hardship of those campaigners, the freezing cold nights, the blazing hot days, blokes had their tongues swelled up with thirst and the heat, their lips cracked and all the rest of it. Jack didn't sign up to pull machine guns out across the desert, but he did it. So in my humble opinion, that whether you were whether you're a Royal Naval seaman, whether you're a Royal Marine, or whether you're a soldier, if you had these two medals on your chest, you bloody well deserved them. And ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your kind attention.